If your dialogue sounds stiff, unnatural, or like everyone is giving a speech, you're not alone. Dialogue is one of the hardest elements of crafts to master. I'm Sarah Hoffman, founder of Inimitable Books, and today I'm going to be talking about how to write dialogue that sounds like real people are actually talking and not just figureheads. Here's what often goes wrong. Either dialogue is too formal and nobody sounds like they're having an actual conversation, or it's too realistic with all the small talk, and long pauses that happen in real life but would make readers skip pages. I see dialogue where every character sounds the same, or where characters always say exactly what they mean with perfect clarity that leaves no room for misinterpretation or drama. And there are always conversations that are essentially info dumps in quotation marks. The key to writing good dialogue is balance. You need to capture how people talk without including the boring parts. Every line should do at least one of these things: reveal character, advance plot, create conflict, or develop relationships. Ideally, each line of dialogue will do at least two of those things. Let's look at an example from The Storm Gathers by Malin Holiday. This is part of chapter 1 and is readers' in-person introduction to Alana Zaya, a character who was set up in the prologue. In this dialogue exchange, we have her talking to her husband, who is the king of Jaren, about a political situation that they don't see eye to eye on.
You shouldn't have let him in. Bending to his will shows weakness. He was going to make a scene at the front gates, Eric explained. We have a lot of very important people visiting us. I wanted things to go smoothly. Then you should have sent me to speak with him. I didn't think your particular brand of persuasion would be appropriate given his country's current situation. I wouldn't have hurt the man, she snapped. At least not physically.
That excerpt was narrated by Beau Powell, who has done an amazing job on books 1 and 2 in the Stormfall trilogy, The Storm Gathers and The Shadow Rises, and the forthcoming third book in the trilogy, which will be ending in 2027. You can tell from this interaction that Alana is much more intense than her husband, Eric. She is known to be dangerous, perhaps even violent, and though this excerpt is short, it effectively paints her, him, their relationship, and the political situation surrounding the country craft. That's a lot of things it's setting up, but it doesn't drag. It doesn't sound too real with pauses, ums, or false starts. And it also doesn't sound fake like a robot wrote it. Can you say the same for your dialogue? If not, keep watching. Even if you believe yourself to be a very honest person, most people don't say exactly what they mean, especially when emotions are high. In the Inimitable Writing Community course Query Ready, I quoted A Diamond Bright and Broken by Holly Davis to show off how subtext works. But for this video, I'm going to pull from the forthcoming Inimitable Books title, Grandma's Little Secret by Becca C. Smith, coming out in February 2026. As she cautiously hugged her grandmother, Virginia whispered in Emma's ear, "Sweet dreams, baby girl." It's a great example of subtext because it comes after Emma has had her prophetic dream of her grandmother killing her grandfather, has tried to foil that, and has evaded her grandmother's attempt to kill her. Other types of subtext include passive aggressiveness, protective, if they are trying to shield their feelings from themselves or others, uncertainty, power dynamics, where hierarchy shapes the words that are used. And that's not an exhaustive list, but it's a good place to start. Be wary of making every conversation cryptic. That would be exhausting, but strategic use of subtext makes dialogue feel real and layered. In real conversations, people interrupt, talk over each other, and don't complete thoughts. You can see it in our live streams here on this channel all the time. In Until the Last Page by Chantal Godori, there are lots of instances of characters interrupting each other. But one that I particularly love is as follows. "A princess," Hunter scoffed, shaking his head. "Why would anyone want a prince?" "Yes, Hunter," Snow White interjected, her laughter cutting through his scoff. "Why would they?" Now, this dialogue is helped along by telling readers that Snow White is the one who cuts in because she's a princess and therefore has more weight in the conversation. This interruption shows their interaction on a different level than if she had let him finish the thought, however offensive it might have been to her. With all the talk about AI using M dashes, and that's a sign of being written by AI, you need to remember that AI was trained on stolen work, and one of the reasons that human writers use an M dash is to show that a thought has been cut off. So be sure to use em dashes when there's an interruption in dialogue in your book. I promise you it's better to be grammatically accurate. But back to the actual writing of interruptions for your dialogue, you need to have characters finish each other's sentences when they are super in sync. Let characters talk past each other rather than directly responding, because that isn't always how it happens in real life. But you don't always want your characters interrupting each other. That will get tired very quickly. So save interruptions for when your characters are arguing, when there is an urgent moment between people who know each other well to show dismissal or avoidance. And I believe that if you are writing an interruption, you need to be able to guess what the end of the first person's sentence was, even if we never get confirmation. In dialogue, each character needs to speak distinctly, because if you can't tell who's talking without the help of dialogue tags, your readers are going to get confused. I talk about this in our video about creating compelling characters, and I will leave that linked in a card up above. A really great way to show this off is from our forthcoming title, Thanks for Watching by Kate Kavanaugh. Here's different lines of dialogue from some of those characters, and you're going to understand why it's important to have your characters be differentiated in their dialogue, not just physical appearance or their worldviews. Although worldview definitely affects people's dialogue. Maybe they have a soft spot for her and knew they weren't diverse enough. I like her. You only like her because she has less subscribers than you and she poured you booze. What the fuck, Ro? And then later in that same chapter, but unrelated to that interaction, a different character says, did y'all not? Even though you haven't met these characters yet, it's easy to see the different styles of speech for each of them. The first is straightforward, maybe a little earnest, but the next one was so blunt that she was rude. One curses, and one is very clearly Southern. There's another character not included in this excerpt who says the word anyways with an S. A different character, though, says the word anyway very sparingly and only as anyway without the S. In writing her character's dialogue, even without the action beats and descriptions that are actually in the book, readers can easily differentiate between the people talking. Your readers should be able to identify your characters the same way, whether they do that through the vocabulary being used, sentence length, formality, slang, what they talk about, how direct they are, speech patterns, and responses to stress. That one character who says, did y'all not, is using an accent. But you don't want to solely rely on heavy dialect or phonetic spelling in your dialogue, because that is exhausting to read. Instead, suggest voice through word choice and rhythm. And you need to maintain consistency throughout your book. Once you establish how someone speaks, they should keep that voice unless something significant happens to change their pattern. An example of something that would justify such a change would be someone who is maybe very well spoken starts to stutter or trail off if they have been scared by something. When our thoughts are scattered, we're not always as in control of our words, and showing that would be helpful. But you don't want to have your characters suddenly change how they talk unless your character is a spy who is actively trying to change everything about themselves. Let's talk about dialogue tags. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not said is dead, and I have to say that said is not boring. It's invisible, which is what you want most of the time. However, there are times when you should be drawing attention to your dialogue tags, and more often than not, that can be replaced by having an effective action beat. So here's an example from A Diamond Bright and Broken by Holly Davis, and it shows the main character's mother talking to someone of a higher rank than them, and she is incredibly obsequious, not just in her word choice, but also in her actions. Ah, such a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mother says, with a head nod and sweep of her dress, her voice sounding disgustingly sweet. Prince Wendell Golden, I'd like to introduce you to my daughter, Miss Cadence Alero. In this example, we have a version of said and an action beat combined. It shows action, it attributes the dialogue, and reveals emotion through her body language. But you don't need action tags for everything, just like you don't need dialogue tags for everything. And you should be using said for most tags because, like I said, it's mostly invisible and doesn't draw attention to itself. You should use other tags sparingly when manner of speaking matters. So if someone is enunciating where they don't normally, it could make a lot of sense to say whatever dialogue you have, character enunciated. But you don't need to always say muttered, whispered, sighed, shouted, yelled. Those are all helpful when they are few and far between. But if every single one of your dialogue tags is avoiding the word said, it's going to feel exhausting. And you should be skipping these dialogue tags entirely when it's clear who is speaking. However, if you have a giant block of dialogue and one character is speaking for a very long time, you want to break that up. Preferably, you would actually want to rewrite it so it is not an info dump adjacent type of lecture or monologue. But if it needs to all be there, then at least break it up with some action beats. Or if you have characters who are speaking and it starts feeling like they are talking heads divorced from their surroundings, then add an action beat to ground the scene in their setting. Dialogue tags and action beats both provide visual breaks and pacing in longer exchanges, but again, you don't want to overdo it. Filler isn't just types of scenes like I discussed in the last video on this channel, but anything that makes your story drag. And that applies to dialogue too. Good dialogue in fiction means it leaves out the boring parts while keeping the flavor of natural speech. It doesn't have the filler words that many of us use in real life, like the word like, or frequent long pauses, as I mentioned earlier, as people gather their thoughts. Think of it as a podcast that has been edited. It sounds realistic because it's human and not delivered like a stiff robot. It's more polished than how most people talk in their daily lives. Here's an example from Mother Mercy by Chandra Arthur, releasing from Inimitable Books in March 2026. I don't think you understand what you're asking me to do. I'm sorry I couldn't save your mother, but that doesn't mean I'm going to send you to your death to make you feel better. I'm not saying I'll never tell you. I'm saying not now. You're not ready. I deserve to know the truth. You know more than enough already. In this short exchange, the characters are moving the plot forward. They are revealing their personalities and fleshing out their relationship for readers to understand. They aren't wasting time on unnecessary fluff or filler in greeting each other, saying that they've had this conversation many times before. Chandra Arthur skipped those parts because they're not interesting, and you should follow her example. Leave out greetings and goodbyes unless they're significant to the story. Don't include exact repetition of known information, excessive filler words, or small talk if it doesn't serve the story. Dialogue in a fictional story is the distilled version of what we all wish we could do in real life. It is not a direct transcription of how people actually talk, but it is a better and improved version of it. Some of the mistakes I see often in dialogue are ones I've already talked about in this video. Dialogue being too straightforward, being an info dump in quotation marks, or all the characters sound the same. But some that I haven't mentioned before are the overuse of names. In real life, people rarely use names once people know each other. If people used other people's names as frequently as some people write them doing, no one would feel embarrassed by having to say, sorry, what's your name again? Because they would have heard it multiple times within the conversation. You don't want to give your characters perfect grammar. Your writing should be grammatically correct, but people don't speak that way. And if you have all of your characters speaking with perfect grammar, it's not going to feel real. Now, it can be a character quirk like Captain Raymond Holt in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's actually something that he drops when he gets drunk or is really upset. So you can make it part of their character, but you can't have all of your characters speaking with perfect grammar because that's just not realistic. To test your own dialogue, you should be reading it out loud. If it sounds like something a person would say, then you're probably good. If it sounds like someone's reading from a script, then you have a problem. If it is full of filler words, then you want to edit those out. Can you tell who's speaking? If not, make sure you're differentiating your voices. Cut every line that doesn't reveal character, advance plot, or create tension. If it doesn't do any of these, it definitely needs to go. If it does at least one, consider revising it so that it can do at least two of these things. If you have a scene where characters are being too direct, then make sure you add in subtext. And then check your tags. Remove ones that are unnecessary and add in action beats when you need a bigger break between bits of dialogue. And then find any info dumps that you may have written. revise those to convey the same information that needs to be shared with readers in a natural sounding conversation with your characters. If this video helped you, you might find the Inimitable Writing Community's Query Ready course even more so, because it has exercises to make sure that your characters have distinct voices. Membership also includes Q&As where you can ask questions about your specific story challenges. Our next Q&A is on December 10th, 2025, and we'll have two special guests, Nikki Carrero from The Rights Factory and Vicky Weber from Creative Media Agency. The link to sign up is in the description down below. And be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next video coming up in this playlist where I will be talking about the ubiquitous writing advice of show, don't tell. In the meantime, share your favorite line of dialogue that you've ever written and let me know why you're proud of it. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.